Hi guys, welcome back to Greenify. I'm your host, Luca Fortella, and today's topic is something that I find so interesting and so important because it's something that no matter where you guys are located around the globe, everyone can relate to it. Today's episode of Greenify is about sustainable modes of transportation and what we can do to maximize our efforts in sustainability revolving transportation. So, when you guys talk about transportation, it's normally split up into two different genres. It's split up into short distance transportation and long distance transportation. So, when you talk about short distance transportation, which is what we're going to be starting with, it's normally traveling from distances of a 10 to 30 mile radius. So, it's normally like, for me at least, I don't know where you guys live, but for me, it's like driving from school to my house, or from my house to my school, or from my house to the gym, anything of that kind of manner, though it like kind of varies like depending where you live. But the key is finding ways to make like all those trips as efficient, convenient, and sustainable as possible no matter where you guys live. So first, let's break down the topics into three different categories: urban, suburban, or rural areas, because transportation heavily differs depending on if you live in those three categories. For example, you're not going to be driving that often in, let's say, London. And I have a little fact for you guys because my grandma actually lives 2 hours outside of London. And when she wants to drive up to London, she has to pay this like heavy toll to get into the city of London, and everyone has to pay it unless you actually live in the city of London. So it's kind of like deterring people from using their cars in the city, so they want you to use other forms of public transportation, which I find really interesting, and I really like that initiative. Okay, let's start with urban areas. So in cities, public transit systems like electric buses, metro systems, and trams are normally the best options to get around. Let me think if there's any others. I don't think so. But there's also micro mobility solutions, for example, bike sharing programs and also kind of line bikes. Those are really popular. These not only reduce emissions, but also kind of alleviate congestion. And what I mean by congestion is that big urban cities like New York City, London, Rome, Milan, all these all these cities are very heavily polluted from all these different cars, these public transportation systems. So any kind of small change or sustainable initiative can really make a difference. For example, Copenhagen and Amsterdam have seen significant improvements in air quality since they had funded and made investments into the bike infrastructure. So here's a little small stat I have for you guys. So shared micromobility options like bike and scooter has seen a massive increase from 20 million trips in 2015 to 136 trips in 2019. So that is absolutely insane. And I have a feeling it may be because of social media, because I had never really heard of these micro mobility solutions before social media, before I was kind of like scrolling through TikTok. But it may also just be because I'm on like a certain side of TikTok. If you guys don't know, I have Greenify podcast on TikTok where we post a lot of informational topics revolving sustainability. So make sure to go follow that account. Anyway, let's move on to suburban areas. So personal vehicles often play a large role in suburban areas, which makes a lot of sense because like it's kind of hard to get around and there's not a lot of public transportation in suburban areas, but there are ways to make that a lot more green. For example, you guys can carpool, or there's also apps. So if you guys don't know anybody who lives in your neighborhood or lives in your area, you can use apps that can carpool together. And community-driven ride-sharing programs are also some excellent options. And let's not forget the growing adoption of electric and hybrid vehicles, though sometimes those may not be sustainable. They are a more sustainable alternative. So I have a little fun fact for you guys, or not fun fact, but something that can relate to me. I actually carpool with someone who lives 2 streets down from me every single day, and I honestly really do feel a big difference, and I feel like I do make an impact just with my small initiative. So I really kind of encourage everyone watching, if you guys do have anyone who lives like near you guys, to kind of work together and carpool together. It's not that hard. And so also for suburban commuters, EVs powered by clean energy produce significantly lower lifetime emissions compared to gas-powered cars. Plus, efficient public transit connecting suburbs to cities can make a big difference for those who want to ditch their cars altogether. And now lastly, we're going to be talking about rural areas. So I know that rural areas are very different and the challenges can be different. Distances are often longer and public transit options can be sparse, but that doesn't mean sustainability solutions are out of reach. Hybrid vehicles and community shuttles are, I feel like, a great starting point, though it's not going to limit the issue overall. It's definitely something that's a little bit more sustainable. As I said prior to this, a small initiative can go a long way, considering that maybe your city doesn't have a lot of sustainable initiatives already. And in some areas around the US and around the world, we're seeing initiatives like solar-powered shuttles or renewable-powered tractors, which I find so interesting. And I think that more farms, for example, should try and incorporate sustainable initiatives, just considering that their production and how they make money is so heavily funded by sustainability, and without kind of sustainability and with climate changing reaching an all-time high, it's definitely going to impact them and how much they're making and how much production they can make. So I feel like they should be the ones kind of starting this initiative, and definitely in suburban areas. For instance, rural regions investing in affordable EVs and expanding charging infrastructure could bridge accessibility gaps while reducing reliance on fossil fuels. It's all about finding like the right fit for each community. Though it might be difficult, there's always something that you guys can do and something that everyone can do to bridge that gap between the sustainability and unsustainability of transportation. Okay, now that we've talked about mostly all of the short distance transportation options, let's go into long distance transportation options. So this includes methods like planes, cars, buses, and trains. I feel like when you think about long distance, you're normally thinking about planes or like trains, but flying has such an enormous environmental impact, but they are creating, and there are some greener alternatives emerging. So let's get into it. So with rail transport, high-speed electric trains are becoming very popular, and they're also a very fantastic option. They can emit up to 90% less CO2 compared to short-haul flights. Europe's train networks are a great example of this, reducing reliance on both cars and planes. Plus, electrified rail systems powered by renewable energy makes this mode of transport even greener. I don't know if you guys have seen on social media or if you guys have been there, Japan actually has so many high-speed trains that are so much more sustainable. And I honestly feel like so many places around Asia are living ahead of their time in terms of sustainability. Not that I have been there, but I have always been fascinated by Asia's culture, and I've researched a lot about it, and I've seen how they're definitely trying to reduce their carbon emissions and their their emissions overall, which I find so interesting. And I also want another little fun fact. I don't know if you guys know, but the US is the leading carbon emissions. So the US has, or what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, the US emits the most amount of carbon emissions out of any country out of the world, which is so disappointing. And I feel I feel really disappointed in the US, and just considering that we have so many resources available to work together to kind of fight against this climate crisis, it really disappoints me to figure out that we are the leading carbon emission country in the world. That's just so disappointing. And I really hope that we can work together and with other platforms just like Greenify, fight this climate crisis. Okay, next up, buses. Intercity electric buses are becoming way more popular as a sustainable and affordable way to travel long distance. North America and Asia, as I mentioned, are seeing initiatives rolling out EV buses, making them viable options for reducing emissions. So lastly, I know we can't kind of cut out flying as a whole, but let's talk about flying. One of the biggest contributors to carbon emissions is aviation, and the aviation industry accounts for 2 to 3% of global emissions. But there's progress being made. Biofuel powered planes and sustainable aviation fuel, SAF, are key areas of development. And when air travel is unavoidable, you can offset your carbon footprint through programs that support reforestation or renewable energy projects. And I know a few airlines around the US are actually, though that they know that flying is not the most sustainable mode of transportation, they definitely try to kind of counter that and make their onboard experience as sustainable as possible. For example, in their food service, they kind of sell food that's sustainable, or their drink service, they kind of reduce the amount of plastic that's being used, and they recycle everything, etc. And I think that's definitely something that needs to be spread around every kind of airline, and it's a great start to the broader issue that needs to be seen and spoken about. That's actually the last of the long distance travel, and just to summarize what we talked about in today's episode, we kind of talked about how sustainable transportation can fit into all different kind of lifestyles, from urban, suburban, and rural areas, and how they can fit sustainability into their everyday lives. For example, micromobility and EV adoption. And for long journeys, for example, electric trains, buses, and greener air travel are paving the way for a more sustainable future. So take a moment to evaluate your transportation habits. Can you swap a car for a bike ride, or consider investing in an EV? All these small changes can add up. And don't forget to tune in next time. We're going to do a deep dive into kind of other different sectors into transportation or hospitality, and I'm so excited to talk about it with you guys. Bye, guys, and don't forget to follow Greenify Podcast on TikTok and subscribe to Greenify Podcast on YouTube. Bye, guys.